Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Mets Daily on the Fan Arch Network. John Saponaro here with you today and every day to talk about our New York Mets. But of course, before we get started, a quick shout out goes to our friends over at Kalshi for sponsoring the video for a limited time. Use the code FANARCHBASEBALL on the Kalshi app to get $10 when you trade 10. And of course, if you're new to the channel, if you haven't yet subscribed, go ahead and click that subscribe button. We're sitting at just over 4,000 subscribers. We'd love to get to 5,000 by the time the season ends. We want to do it, but more importantly, we want you to be a part of it. Well, our New York Mets, when it is too little too late, open up the ceremonial second half of the season, although most teams have about 65 games to go after the All-Star break, but they open up the second half of the season with a series win against their division rivals down in Philadelphia. And by and large, this was the tale of two series in a way for the New York Mets. Mets get the win on Thursday. Mets get the win on Sunday. Mets lose in the middle on Saturday. Of course, that quirky, weird, not unexpected, but quirky, weird off day on a Friday in the middle of a series. Second time this season versus Philadelphia. The Mets had to deal with that, but able to rebound well and take this series win. And like I said, it's a little too late for the New York Mets, but it is always nice to get wins against your division rivals, and it's always important to get victories and to have good performances from people who are going to be in your future plans in a season that is lost. We've talked about that on this show before, and I maintain that. And that extends to people who may not be here for the long haul, but are going to be here for 2027. I've mentioned the likes of Sean Manaea and Jorge Polanco, guys who are likely to be here next year, where you want to see a contribution from them. You want to see them continue to show you that they're healthy and that they can be productive, and that stuff is important. But it becomes even more important when you're talking about the likes of, in this series in particular, Christian Scott, Nolan McLean, AJ Ewing, Carson Benj. It's the guys who are going to be here for the rest of 26, all of 27, 28, 29. You see where I'm going with that. So the weird thing that I thought about this series, which I did not expect to hear this, but I guess in the back of my mind I knew, was that, sorry about that, hit the microphone. This is the first series win on the road for the New York Mets since San Diego. And if you're sitting there and you're thinking like, John, wow, San Diego, that felt like a long time ago, you'd be absolutely right. The San Diego series the Mets played out here in Southern California was June 5th, 6th, and 7th. This series just wrapped up on July 19th. So it was over a month, essentially 6 weeks, since the Mets won a series on the road. And I'll say that again, it was 6 weeks since the last time the Mets won a series on the road. So when I say too little too late, that's what we're talking about. We talk about the Mets season in a nutshell. We've done that a couple different times where there's been a stat thrown out or a representative game or what went wrong in a particular instance. This is what we're talking about. When you look at this season and you see it's the first time that they've had a road series win in 6 weeks, that's how you wind up with such an abysmal record. That's how you wind up as one of the teams that's 100% a seller. That's how you wind up with one of the teams with the worst record in baseball, who's just playing terribly and looks awful and everything about it. So it's just another one of those things that you look at and you go, oh, yeah. Because when a team gets this mired this deep in mediocrity and just terrible baseball, sometimes it's easy for us fans, even if we watch every game, and I know a lot of us do, to forget how did we get here? Because you slip into apathy. And I think sometimes you hear a number like that and it's like getting a bucket of cold water thrown in your face in the worst possible way to remind you like, oh, right, that's what this is. And I think the last thing I'll say about this series before we dive into some standout performances from Sunday's game in particular is it shows you how quote unquote easy it is to win when you get good starting pitching. You see it with Scott on Thursday. You see it with McLean on Sunday. And the Mets are able to beat a good team, a team that's certainly better than them, playing better than them, better record than them, in a ballpark where that team thrives, in a ballpark where that team can really hit. It's easy, again, quote unquote easy, because nothing is easy in Major League Baseball, but it's easy to get wins and look like a competent team when your starting pitcher comes out and gives you a really good chance to win. And I said this series was the tale of two series. When you look at that middle game on Saturday, you see how the Mets have struggled this year. Now, I know a lot has been made about the offense, and rightfully so, but the offense has some baked in excuses, despite the fact that guys haven't been productive. When you lose Lindor for 2 months, when you lose Soto for 20 days, when you have, two kids come up and one of them has to take a month to adjust, and you have Bo Bichette and he has to take a month to learn how to, be a New York Met and not be a Toronto Blue Jay. Again, I'm not making excuses for them. I'm just saying, if you look at where they're at now with some guys back healthy and some guys fully adjusted, you can see how this offense was designed to be better than it was for the beginning part of the season. Yeah, it might have sunk them early, but you can see how point A to point B, this was supposed to be a much better offense. It's there. If you're looking, if you're watching, you can see it. With the starting pitching, it's really, over the last couple months since Clay Holmes got hurt, you see Freddie Peralta being ineffective and, having to rely on Christian Scott, and watching Nolan McLean go through his bumps to get back to where he is. We'll talk a lot about Nolan McLean coming up in a little bit, but you go from, okay, 2 really well-pitched games, and the Mets win those games, and the Mets make those games look, again, quote unquote, easy in victory, 4-1, 6-1. But then you look at that middle game where they lose 6-1, and it's the exact opposite. Sean Manaea goes in that game 4 2/3, gives up a couple runs, has got a traffic on the bases, home runs. They go to Kodai Senga. Kodai Senga is terrible. So you have Sean Manaea, who's not good in that game. He's mediocre at best. And then you go to Kodai Senga, who's awful in the 1 1/3 innings that he pitches. And it's just like, oh, again, it's the bucket of cold water, right? Oh, that's how we got here. That's how we got here. Because you see a team with Christian Scott and Nolan McLean on the bump, and you're like, wow, okay, all right. This Mets team they've got something going, right? And then you watch the Sean Manaea Kodai Senga game, and you're like, oh, right. Forget it. I forgot. It's 2026. Season's over. A lot of these guys suck. Some of these guys shouldn't be here. But here we are. But be that as it may, the Mets do get a series win, the first one in 6 weeks. I'm never going to get over saying that. The first one in 6 weeks. And if you're a fan like me, I've mentioned on the show before, I want to see the Mets, put together some good baseball here in the last 60 or so games, because it's important to me as somebody who wants to see the progress moving forward, but it's also important to me as a fan who wants to watch all these games. Baseball games are precious. There's a lot of them, but the season is over, and then, back east it gets cold and you have to slip into the winter, and, it's just, baseball's, when it's on and you're in the summer, it's nice. It feels right. And of course I do this show, so I'd like to watch it and see some good baseball. But like I said on the last show last week, there is a lot of tough games coming up for the New York Mets. And it was true of the Phillies series. It's going to be true of this next series in Milwaukee before they have a series at home against the Dodgers, and they've got the Braves. And it's going to be tough for them to put together a really good stretch of baseball right now, but I'd still like to see them try. Which brings me to Francisco Lindor, and the reports of his demise have been greatly exaggerated. Francisco Lindor, amidst all of the rumors and all of the conjecture and all of the hate that he is receiving from Mets fans that is so unfair and unnecessary and unjustified, he reminds folks on Sunday who he is. He goes 3 for 3 with a home run, 3 RBI, 1 run scored, 2 walks. He's on base all 5 times. But I was told on Twitter that Lindor was old. I was told on Twitter that Lindor is washed. I was told that Lindor is a clubhouse cancer, even though when they asked him in the postgame about the home run that he hit, he said all the credit goes to Bo Bichette and the at-bat he had in front of me. But I was told this guy can't play in New York. I was told this guy isn't good. I'm told he's not a good guy. He's not a good teammate. He's a problem. He's old. He's terrible. Everything. I know I'm repeating myself, but go look at my Twitter mentions. Go ahead, at John Saponaro, JOHNSAPONARO. Go ahead and look at him. I've been defending Lindor for 2 weeks. I mean, I've defended Lindor his entire tenure with the Mets, which is insane. But for the last couple weeks with these trade rumors, especially over the weekend, I've been trying to do my best to let people know, hey, this is where it's at. And I've done it on the show too, and people have disagreed in the comments here. But it doesn't look like a washed player to me. That doesn't look like a guy who's not a part of the solution here, especially when you add in the fact that he wants to stay. He wants to be here. We talked about that on the show that was supposed to come out on Friday, but I was a little late getting it out, so it got out on Saturday. But the point remains, according to Will Salmon's reporting, Will Salmon and Ken Rosenthal at The Athletic, he wants to be here. Lindor doesn't want to go. He likes New York. He likes playing in Queens. He wants to be a part of the solution. I don't want to get rid of people who want to be here. I don't want to get rid of people who want to be part of the solution. So, that if nothing else, and he's still a damn good baseball player, that's what I find frustrating. And I want to give a shout out to Laura Albanese, who covers the Mets for Newsday. She put out, and I tweeted it, so if you go over to my Twitter, you'll see the article retweeted. She put out a great piece the other day over the weekend where basically the tweet was, oh, how quickly people forget. And the headline for the column was, Lindor has earned the right to fix this. And it's a great article. It's a short article, but there's no clickbait. There's no rumor. There's no fabrication of story. It's just from a person who has covered the Mets for a couple of years now and does a really good job. It's just, hey, Mets fans, remember who this guy is. And it's funny that article comes out basically on the day that Lindor shows everybody, hey, remember who I am. And I've been sitting there saying, hey, remember who this guy is. Lindor is a part of the Mets' future, whether you like it or not. And I will say this, and then we will move on because we spoke a lot about Francisco Lindor over the last week or so. He deserves his flowers for this game, putting the team on his back. Be careful what you wish for, because if the Mets were ever to trade Lindor, and it's not going to happen at the deadline, I would put it at a 0 chance. But there's been some nonsense reporting from rival executives, all with an agenda, that Lindor is going to get dealt in the winter. Let me just say this on record right now on Monday, July 20th, 2026. If the Mets trade Francisco Lindor, it will be a mistake. It'll be a mistake. They will be wrong for doing it, and it will have set them back. I don't think they will. I don't think they should. But if they do, it will be a mistake. Baseball season is here, and now you can trade every game on Kalshi, and you know what I do. I sit down to hit record, but before I hit that red light button, I go on over to the Kalshi app, and I see where you might be able to find some value. And this one is Mets related, but it's not positive for the New York Mets. The New York Mets open a series today in Milwaukee against the Brewers, a very good team, and they are facing Jacob Misiorowski, a very good pitcher, somebody who's in the conversation for the Cy Young, somebody who throws very, 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 very hard, and you know that pitchers who throw hard give the Mets fits here in 2026. So if you're a Mets fan, I apologize, and of course you're watching Mets Daily, so why wouldn't you be one? But if you're a Mets fan, I apologize for this because it's not a positive for the Mets. But I do think it's a realistic outcome and some good value for you over on Kalshi. Jacob Misiorowski at over 9 strikeouts in the game is trading at 55 cents a share, which means $100 will get you $176. And 9 strikeouts is a lot, but I like that number for Jacob Misiorowski against the New York Mets. I think he is going to give this team absolute fits tonight. We'll talk more about the game and the entire series coming up in the final segment. But on Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there is no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy into and out of your position. For a limited time, use the code FANARCHBASEBALL when you download the Kalshi app to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi, trade on anything, must be 18 and over. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risks and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. Can't talk about the Philadelphia series and the game on Sunday without talking about Nolan McLean, who may have delivered the best start of his young career. Certainly one of the best, as it says in the headline below. But we talked about Lindor and putting the team on his back. And we talked about Christian Scott and the series kind of overview and how you can look so good when you get good pitching. And of course, Nolan McLean's name was mentioned there at the top of the show. But let's take a little bit of a closer look at just how electric this guy was. I said before, the most important thing for the rest of 2026 is seeing people who are going to be a part of this team succeed. And even more important than that is people who are going to be a part of this team, the young players, not only succeed, but continue to grow, continue to build on, right? I want to see Sean Manaea pitch well enough to be a fifth starter in 2027, if that's what it comes down to. I want to see Jorge Polanco hit well enough to be the team's regular DH. But beyond that, I don't really need to see much else. I just need to see some proof that that's possible. With Nolan McLean, you're hoping this guy can be the Mets ace in a couple of years. With Nolan McLean, you want to see not only success, but you want to see progress. And we know in baseball, progress and development is not linear, but you want to continue to see the progress. And what you saw on Sunday was not only progress, not only success, but like I said before, it was electric. Against that Philly lineup in that ballpark in Philadelphia, 6 innings pitched, 2 hits, 2 walks, no runs, 10 strikeouts. And he bared down at the end of that outing because in his final inning, he got 2 outs, Turner gets on, and Schwarber gets on, and he's got to face Harper, and he was near the end. He was going through the lineup for the 3rd time, a really tough top of the lineup, and going up against, what he knows is going to be his final inning, and he bears down, and he guts it out, and he gets out of that inning, and he is able to go 6 shutout innings. And now you look up at the season for Nolan McLean, and this is shout out to Daniel Wexler, who does great work covering the Mets on Twitter. He's a good follow. It's I believe it's at Wex, WEX Rules, RULES, Daniel Wexler. But he pulled up this stat, and I thought it was interesting because you see the struggles that Nolan McLean went through for about a month, and it was not a lot of clean games in there, even when he was better, but there were a lot of messy, ugly games. But now, here we are in July, after his game on July 19th, he's 9th in FWAR in the National League, 13th in ERA, 8th in FIP, which is fielding independent pitching, which takes defense out of the equation, 4th in strikeouts per 9, and 5th in strikeouts with 135. Those are some really good numbers. And I know that we all wanted Nolan McLean to come out here and be the second coming of Jacob deGrom, or the second coming of prime Matt Harvey, or the second coming of Tom Seaver, or the second coming of Doc Gooden, or the second coming of prime Ari Dick. Pick your great Mets pitcher or your great Mets performing pitcher over a window. But the bottom line is this was a guy who came into 2026 with 8 starts at the major league level. This was a guy who transitioned like 2 years ago to being a full-time pitcher. He was a two-way player in college. He was a two-way player when the Mets drafted him. So there was always going to be some growing pains. There was always going to be some bumps. And I'm sure we might still see some because he's very, very, very new to this and he's very young in his career. But he came out doing everything in this game that was advertised. The spin rate, forget it. The ball was spinning like crazy. But he had command of it too. And then he was, he's got a not great fastball, but a very good fastball. And he's throwing the fastball and he's locating his pitches and he's got the sinker working and he's got the spinners spinning and everything that you needed to see out of Nolan McLean in this game, he gave you. And I think sometimes when you're a young pitcher like McLean and you have some blow up outings, I think in a way it's good for the casual baseball observer. It's not good for his ERA. It's not good for his confidence, but I think it's good for the casual baseball fan because when you see him have a propensity to not locate and walk guys and get hit, and then you see a game like Sunday, it's easy to see where the talent is for anybody. You don't have to be a scout, is my point. You can understand very clearly that Nolan McLean does not do this with smoke and mirrors. He's not doing it by being crafty. This is not, and no disrespect to him, Jose Quintana, who needs to live on the edges, who needs to live on the margins, who needs to keep guys off balance. This is a guy who has stuff in all caps, underlined, period at the end. Because when he gets blown up, it's because his stuff isn't working. He's not locating, or the can't throw the spinners for strikes, spinning too much, and that leads him to lean on his fastball, and then his fastball's in the zone, and you're like, okay, I see how this guy is getting hit. I see where the issues are. You don't need to be an elite evaluator of talent to see what's going wrong. Then he has a game like he did on Sunday, and you're like, oh. But don't worry, this guy has the stuff and the makeup to do it because you watch it and you're just mystified by some of the things that he can do. So when I say it's good, I don't mean it's good for him, although I guess, players do have to take their lumps. But I mean, it's good for a baseball fan. It's good for somebody like you or me who watches it from the couch. And I like to think that I know baseball pretty well, but I'm not a scout. I'm not a talent evaluator. I've never worked in a front office. I don't know like some of these people know. So it's nice to see where you're like, oh, this is how you separate it. This is the line of demarcation. And so I think for the casual baseball fan, which, or I should say not casual fan, but casual observer, which is what most of us are when it comes to evaluating what we're seeing, I think the way Nolan McLean has succeeded and failed is good for us because you can understand it very clearly. It really removes a lot of the gray area. But hats off to him for not only this start, but for rebounding to the way he has rebounded over the last month or so after really, really, really having, a pretty brutal stretch where he could do almost nothing right. And now he's really swung that pendulum back in the other direction. And that's evidenced by some of those numbers I threw out from Daniel Wexler, the 9th in FWAR, 13th in ERA, 8th in FIP, 4th in Ks per 9, 5th in strikeouts, all in the NL. Pretty good numbers for a young player with a lot of talent. Last but certainly not least, let's talk about this upcoming series in Milwaukee. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. It's going to be tough. Okay. Milwaukee is really good, as evidenced by how they play, by the players on their roster and the performances that they're getting, but also evidenced by their record. They're 62-37. They are one game back of the Los Angeles Dodgers for the best record in Major League Baseball. Hard to believe maybe for some of you folks, but last year they finished the regular season with the best record in Major League Baseball. So they are a team that can do this. They're a team that knows how to win. The Mets are a team kind of going in the opposite direction right now, of course. And the pitching matchups in a lot of ways don't necessarily favor the Mets, but there are some interesting things that we can point to here. And look, I'm not going to go through individual numbers on players in the lineup, but when you look at some of the people they have, from Contreras to Bryce Terang and Jake Bowers, I mean, they just have guys that are just doing, Jackson Chourio, like they just have guys who are doing what they're supposed to do. They're sort of this machine. They just function. They just work. So their lineup is going to be tough for pitchers to navigate. I don't know where it ranks in terms of numbers or where it ranks in terms of eye test, best lineups in the National League. I don't know, but they just seem to always have guys. They have a bunch of guys that you've never heard of until you've heard of them. They have a bunch of guys who are just like, oh, who's that guy? Oh, and then, you look up 2 seasons later and you're like, oh, that guy's really friggin' good. Who is that guy? So that's kind of the way Milwaukee churns through their roster, but that's what you can expect. But the pitching matchups I find incredibly interesting. And first up tonight, we get one that does not favor the Mets. It's Freddie Peralta, former Brewers ace, versus Jacob Misiorowski, current Brewers ace. That's interesting. We all know the struggles that Freddie Peralta has had. We talked a little bit about Misiorowski and the strikeouts and what the velocity and what he can do and how he can shut down a team and how I think he's going to shut down the Mets. But he is pitching to a 10-4 record with a 1.62 ERA. Good reason for that. Again, he's firmly in the conversation, if not the favorite, to win the NL Cy Young. He's going to be right there. And I think he puts another little notch in his belt in this game. I think it's going to be damn near impossible. It's going to take something of a miracle for the Mets to win this game. And from the Mets side, if you're Freddie Peralta going back to Milwaukee, have a little bit of pride in what's going on. Show up your former team, show out for your current team, and I don't know, show off for your prospective new team because you're going to get traded. And now there's only a couple more starts left. Like the best thing we can get out of Freddie Peralta is a good start here and a good start in his next one where people start to buy in that he's, everything's all good with Freddie Peralta. So I think that's really what you're looking for from the Mets. I mean, it sucks that you have to boil it down to that where you're kind of already calling this a loss. I'm calling it a loss at 6:45 in the morning out here in LA, but I think that's what this is going to be. It's going to be really tough for the Mets to win this game. So, I've maybe, like I said, go on over to the Kalshi app, look at some of those props on Jacob Misiorowski and strikeouts, and just hope that Freddie Peralta can match him for long enough, but this is going to be a tough game, especially the way Freddie Peralta has pitched of late. Then you have another interesting matchup. You have a current Mets pitching prospect versus a former Mets pitching prospect. It's going to be Zach Thornton versus Brandon Sproat, which is very interesting. Zach Thornton has been really good in his limited sample size with the Mets. He's 0-1 with a 2.6 ERA. He has earned this spot. He has earned the right to be in this rotation probably for the rest of the season now. I think especially if he's in the rotation pitching on July 20th, when August 3rd rolls around and at least Freddie Peralta is going to be traded. Maybe Clay Holmes goes too. Who knows? Maybe they find a taker for Kodai Senga in some kind of package. I just think there's not really a way, barring health, that Zach Thornton's not in the rotation for the rest of the season. So again, when you talk about young players in the plans for the future, you want to see him continue to grow and continue to be successful. He's been very successful so far, and you've seen that he is as advertised. Maybe not plus stuff, but he's not afraid to pitch, and he knows how to pitch, and he throws strikes, and that's what you're going to get from him. On the other side, you got Brandon Sproat, 3-4 with a 5.16 ERA. Of course, Brandon Sproat goes with Jet Williams to the Brewers for Freddie Peralta in the offseason, and he's not been good. He's had some good starts. He's had some blow-up outings. He's probably a guy who, if Milwaukee's not dealing with all of the injuries that they're dealing with in the starting rotation with Woodruff and some of the other guys, he's probably not in the rotation right now. He's probably back in AAA, but they need him. They needed pitching, and they need him, and he's been there, and we'll see. So I think of all the games, this might be one. But again, I was going to say this might be one where the Mets can get to the starter. But again, Brandon Sproat's a guy with a good fastball, throws hard. Not as hard as Misiorowski, certainly, but, maybe there's a little bit of, oh, you traded me? And we've seen that before. Like, players with less talent than Brandon Sproat have stood the Mets on their heads offensively or pitching-wise, whatever, when they get let go. So we'll see. We'll see if the Mets can get to their former prospect or if Brandon Sproat gets to his former team. And then in the final game of the series on Wednesday, you've got not really the intrigue of these first two matchups with former ace, current ace, former prospect, current prospect, but you do have two guys who are kind of eerily similar. Just two young pitching prospects that have put up good numbers on the season so far in Christian Scott versus Logan Henderson. Christian Scott 3-1 with a 2.87 ERA. Logan Henderson 3-1 with a 2.97 ERA. So, you've got two guys, battling it out in their mid 20s and, trying to make names for themselves. And Logan Henderson hasn't had a ton of time here in the major leagues. Got 5 starts this season. Or excuse me, 5 starts last season. Handful of starts this season. So, you're looking at two guys who are really trying to make a name for themselves. And you're looking at two guys who are really trying to establish themselves. And speaking of 2025, in his little cup of coffee last year, after he made his debut, Logan Henderson was 3-0 with a 1.78 ERA. And he clocks in as the number 7 prospect in the Milwaukee Brewers organization. So, this is going to be a tougher series for the Mets. I think, the Mets had a tough series in Philadelphia, to be sure, but the Mets also didn't face Zach Wheeler, and they didn't face, I almost said Zach Wilson. Jeez. They didn't face Zach Wheeler, and they didn't face Christian Sanchez. So, they got off easy, if you will. Mets are not going to get off easy here facing Mizorowski right out of the gate. And then, after that, you got 2 young pitchers, and who knows what you're going to get, but it's 2 young pitchers with good stuff, and it's 2 young pitchers, in the case of Henderson with, some good numbers, Brandon Sproat not as much, but I'm just not sure what you're going to see. So, I think this is a series the Mets should lose. Maybe they'll surprise us. Maybe they'll surprise me. Again, I try to be a realist. Like, some people are optimistic, some people are pessimistic. I am realistic, but I skew a little bit positive because I want something to root for. If realistic is right down the middle, I'm just a tick towards the positive because I want to find stuff to root for. So, I'd like to see the Mets surprise me. I'd love to be wrong and have them shut me up. And, maybe the Mets lose to Mizorowski and they beat Sproat and they beat Henderson and it's another series win on the road. I don't know, but I think it's going to be hard. You have almost exact opposite records in a way. The Mets have over 40 wins, but, the Brewers are sitting there 62-37. I'd be pretty shocked if the Mets are able to win this series. That's going to do it for this episode of Mets Daily. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Like I said, sitting at just over 4,000 subscribers, looking to get to 5,000 before the season is over. We'd love to do it, but more importantly, we'd love for you to be a part of it. Until next time, I'm John Saponaro. See you tomorrow.